You're watching Reality Check, a hard-fought peace between the Indian state and one of our oldest insurgencies, Nagaland's NSCN IM militant outfit, may be unravelling. The Naga rebels have been in talks for almost 2 decades to push for a demand for a separate Naga state, one that extends beyond Nagaland's borders to include Naga-dominated areas in at least 3 other northeastern states. India has rejected this and has been working on persuading the NSCN to dilute that demand and settle for autonomy. Under the Modi government, the talks seem to accelerate after the appointment of former IB official and presently the Nagaland governor R.N. Ravi as the main intermediary. In August 2015, overseen by the Prime Minister, the government and leaders of the NSCN, that is Mr. Muiva and Isaac Swu, signed what the Prime Minister described as a historic agreement. Now, the details of this agreement were never made public. Only a general statement was issued at that time. That statement said that the government recognized the unique history, culture and position of the Nagas and their sentiments and aspirations. But now, it appears that 5 years later, the agreement might be coming undone. The NSCN says they've asked for the removal of R.N. Ravi, with whom they say things have reached a tipping point and there's a trust deficit. Even more controversially, the NSCN IM has released for the first time what they claim is that framework agreement they signed 5 years ago, in which they say the government recognized the sovereignty of the Nagas, including peaceful coexistence of the 2 entities sharing sovereign power is what that statement says, according to them. And it provided for a new relationship of peaceful coexistence of the 2 entities, indicating a Naga territory sovereign to India, within India. This is something India has never publicly accepted or acknowledged. Now, those tracking this story say that the breakdown was imminent since last October itself, which was the deadline for the peace deal. At that time, R.N. Ravi had hit out at the NSCN for being adamant on a separate flag on constitution for the Nagas, something that he had ruled out. But the NSCN and the other side say that Ravi complicated matters by opening talks with an umbrella group of smaller splinter underground groups called the Naga National Political Groups, or NNPG, which the NSCN claims is an attempt to create a divide between the Nagas. Even further complicating matters, a letter written in June this year by R.N. Ravi to the Nagaland Chief Minister saying that the law and order has collapsed in the state and that the state government is being challenged on a day-to-day basis by armed gangs who question the integrity of the nation. This was surprising, given that the Nagaland government is an NDA ally. Regardless, Mr. Ravi continued his criticism of the Nagaland government and of its links to vested interests in his Independence Day speech this month.
It has the dubious distinction of the worst performing state in the country, including the Northeast region, on almost all the significant indicators of human development. Incongruously, a deeply entrenched network of vested interests has emerged during the period, which has misappropriated the dividends of peace and did not allow them to reach the people.
All of this has led these peace talks to the brink. Now, the Naga rebels, the NSCN, say that they are not talking to Mr. Ravi, they are talking directly to the Intelligence Bureau as mandated by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, reports my colleague Neeta Sharma, is said to be deeply disturbed about the turn of events. All right, joining us tonight on Reality Check, we have with us General N.K. Singh. He is former Chief of the Ceasefire Monitoring Committee of Nagaland. Also joining us is Mr. Kevileto Kiewo, who is the former president and advisor of the Naga Ho-Ho, which is the apex body of all the various Naga tribes and groups. Also joining us is Lalita Kumaramangalam of the BJP, and also Mr. Nengulo Krome, who is Secretary General Naga People's Movement for Human Rights. Okay, let me just start with you, General Singh. You've been the head of the monitoring committee. Now, what is your understanding of why things have led to this almost breakdown situation between the NSCN and Mr. Ravi?
See, what it appears is that most of the minor points seem to have been sorted out by giving or taking a little bit here and there, whether it is some job reservations, whether it is participation in various other organizations, and some development programs for Nagaland. Apparently, they seem to have got stuck on the constitution and the flag. The flag, I believe, that problem could still have been surmounted. But apparently, it is the constitution which seems to be the main stumbling block. Because
okay, the fact that the fact, just to explain to us, the fact that the NSCN is still demanding a separate flag and a separate constitution, which is something that India is not prepared to agree to. But what about, General, the point that Mr. Ravi seems to be making, that even though the talks are supposed to be conducted in a ceasefire situation, the rebels are not supposed to be engaging in any armed activity, his very strong letters and messages seem to indicate the reverse, that rebels are running amok in Nagaland, violence and lawlessness is on the rise. Is that true?
You see, such activities by the armed groups like the NSCN, IM and others have been going on, whether it is extortion or not being confined to their camps, or to that matter, even having their functional town commands, interfering sort of in various governance mechanisms. So that problem is certainly there. If I can say a word about the constitution, you see, when Nagaland got its statehood in 1963, along with that, it got the Article 371A, which protected its religious or social practices, customary laws, administration of civil and criminal justice, and about the land and its resources.
Yes.
Now, the constitution, what NSCN is proposing, what they call the Yazabo, probably is not as democratic as India would like it to be. Because if it was on a purely democratic line, there may not have been that much of a problem, including the points of the Yazabo in the Indian constitution.
Okay,
apparently
you're saying the constitution itself is right. Okay, I'll come back to you. Vijeta Singh, Deputy Editor, The Hindu, who's been reporting on the story, also joins us. Vijeta, now just to understand, so presently as we understand it, that basically there's been this breakdown between Mr. Ravi and the NSCN. IM and the talks are now being held directly with the Intelligence Bureau, mandated the NSCN IM claims by the Prime Minister.
Exactly, Vasu. This development was also, we came to know about this development that IB is holding the talks with NSCN IM. Through IM, NSCN IM released a statement claiming that the Prime Minister has mandated IB to fast track the talks and clear all the pending issues because they have refused to speak to Mr. Ravi. But it's intriguing that all the claims and all the developments on this issue is being released formally by NSCN IM, and there has been no response as such on the part of the government. And NSCN IM even released.
I wanted to ask you about that because the NSCN IM have been releasing all these documents, and they've been making some. I mean, in these documents are some fairly significant claims. Like one of the claims is that the framework agreement that they released says that sovereign. It uses the word sovereign, which is something very surprising. That's something that India has never conceded. But the agreement says that they recognize the sovereignty of the Nagas. That's almost like a state within a state.
Exactly. So this document has been steeped in secrecy for the past 5 years since it was signed in the presence of Prime Minister Narendra Modi at his residence on August 3rd, 2015. And since then, many people have even filed RTIs to get a copy of the framework agreement. And now the NSCN IM, which is the party with which the centre signed an agreement, and Mr. Ravi was the signatory, was the signatory on behalf of the centre. So they are saying sharing the sovereign power. It is a very loaded connotation if you look at it, because government just revoked Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir, which was anyway a hollow proposition. It was not stopping the government from doing anything which they wanted.
So I think hence the question of the double standards. I'll just come to that in a second. But Mr. Crome, if you can give us an idea, now, who do you blame for this breakdown? Because if the breakdown is on the point of the NSCN asking for a separate flag and a constitution, the Indian argument is that was never on the table.
In the first place, Mr. R.N. Ravi has never been sincere in his effort to find peace in the entire peace process.
Okay.
From the beginning of his entry as the interlocutor, his intentions has not been well-meaning.
Why is that?
So
what is the problem?
No. Yeah, if you look at his background, since his entire career as an intelligence official,
Yes.
and then after resigning from his office as intelligence official,
Yes.
he has been meddling into the affairs of the Naga people. He has been writing things against the Naga people, the movement of the Naga people. So when he was appointed as the interlocutor,
Yes.
the Naga people as well as the NSCN, who is on the top with the government of India,
Yes.
had very strong reservation and had made very strong protests as well.
But Mr. Crome, just sorry to jump in, but you know, you do say that on one hand, but on the other, isn't it true that it was during those talks that the framework agreement was signed with Mr. Ravi also very much part of that process?
It just happened that Mr. R.N. Ravi was appointed at that critical point of time where he was given the honor of signing the framework agreement, which was prepared by the interlocutors before him, starting from Swaraj Kaushal to Padmanabh Bhaya to R.S. Pandey. So all these works put together,
okay,
it just came and inherited at the time.
Okay, but Mr. Crome, regardless of you know, your criticism of Mr. Ravi, which seems to be somewhat directed more of a personal nature, but as far as the main point of contention is concerned, Mr. Crome, how can the NSCN at this point demand separate flag and separate constitution? Was that never? I mean, that was. That's not the.
No, it was never an issue in the entire peace process.
Okay.
It is now 23 years. And even after Ravi took over and signed the framework agreement,
Yes.
flag and constitution was never an issue. It was only when the time has come right for settling the issue
Okay.
that Ravi wanted to create some kind of a problem because he's not interested in finding a solution. It seems as if he has come to take over as the interlocutor and has also become the governor of Nagaland
Okay.
to take some kind of a personal revenge on the people of Nagaland.
Okay,
Otherwise,
but,
how a person,
Okay, you do say this, but let me just ask Mr. Keviloto. Mr. Keviloto, you know, is it fair just to blame Mr. Ravi? Because as we just heard from the general and also Mr. Ravi's letters pointing out that violence, armed activities do continue, and NSCN also is continuing. So are they serious about peace? Mr. Keviloto. Mr. Keviloto, can you hear me? Mr. Keviloto Kevo, former president and advisor of Naga Hoho. Okay.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear did you hear
Yes.
my question? Or would you like me to repeat?
Can you hear me? Because yes, I have just heard.
Yes, my question to you, sir, is
Yeah,
that is it only fair to blame Mr. Ravi for the breakdown, or is the NSCN also to blame?
I'm not able to get the audio.
Are the NSCN also to blame, sir? Okay, Mr. Keviloto, we'll come back to you. Let me just go to Lalita Kumar Mangalam. Lalita Kumar Mangalam, the fact is that was this entire breakthrough hyped in 2015, the Prime Minister saying this is historic, when 5 years later it's breaking down and it's raising serious questions about how this was hyped?
Vasu, let's look at the history of how this accord, or what we want to call it, the agreement, was arrived at in Nagaland. As has been said by Mr. Kromo himself, it took several governors and several other representatives of the central government before that, many, many years, to even bring them to the table. Now, it is also an equally well-known fact that violence continues in Nagaland, as does extortion, as General Singh also has said. Now,
no, that's okay. My point is that why hype that breakthrough?
No,
why hype the breakthrough then?
Because at that point, it was a breakthrough. The problem is that for 5 years after what was called a breakthrough or an accord or an agreement, violence continues, and it seems as if certain groups, armed groups there, whether you want to call them guerrillas or whatever other term you want to use, I don't want to use harsh words, have not desisted from or even decreased the amount of violence that is being indulged in. And
But
nor has the extortion that's become a part of everyday life there, nor does it show any signs of decrease. I think on top of it, they have suddenly also
But isn't that
sort of reiterated their earlier demand for a separate flag and a separate constitution, which
But
no
Lalita Kumar
government of
Mangalam-
India can agree to.
Okay, but isn't it also just one point though?
Against Mr. Ravi.
Yeah,
which
just
is
one
not
point
fair.
though. Isn't law and order, the maintaining of it, also the task of the state government, in which, by the way, the BJP is a partner. It's a joint BJP.
It is.
It's a joint
It
BJP state government with the regional party there. But
Vasu,
the governor,
I'm
just let
not
me finish.
saying
The
it
governor, just let me finish. The governor is saying, in a very strongly worded letter and also in his
Yes.
Independence Day speech, that law and order has broken down. Gangs are
Yes.
roaming freely. He says, Chief Minister, I've pointed this out to you many times, but you're doing nothing.
Vasu, I agree with every word that you just said, but kindly remember that Mr. Ravi is as much appointed by the central government as he can be, because he is the governor. The governor is sent from the center to a state.
Yes.
And it must be fairly obvious that Mr. Ravi is, in a sense, reflecting what the center now feels. That after 5 years, despite there being a BJP government which also has other allies in it,
Yeah.
they are not able to handle what the
Okay.
NSCN is actually, the militants there, or the separatists are inflicting on their people. There doesn't
Okay, so
seem
in
to
that
have been
case-
a decrease in violence.
Right.
There doesn't seem to have been decrease in the way that they extort money from
Okay,
the
so
people
in
of
that case,
Nagaland, which is
General-
unfair to that case,
Okay.
to those people.
Okay,
So
so
maybe
General
this is,
Singh-
I mean, just let me 1 minute, just give me half a minute. The fact that the gentleman, Mr. Kromo,
Krome.
went totally, attacking the personal thing of Mr. Ravi, itself shows that it's not a political argument at all. There is something fishy which they are also not wanting to talk about in public, which is why he's trying to make it look like it's a personal thing against Mr. Ravi, who's messed up the whole affair.
Okay,
This-
okay,
it's
all
patent-
right.
That's
Okay, let me
patently,
just go to
obviously
General
not
Singh.
true.
General Singh, so what's the solution? Because the situation seems to be going from bad to worse, and this is all coming from the governor himself. Now, amongst the things that the governor has done is he firstly wrote a letter, as we said, saying it's, gangs are running free. Then there's another letter which I'm going to hold up, which is an office memorandum which was sent by the state government, which basically asked all government employees to disclose whether any of their relatives had any connection
Yeah.
to underground
Yes,
organizations, whether their relatives were part of underground organizations. All state government employees had to fill this. This apparently became yet another bone of contention, General.
See, as far as these letters by the governor to the chief minister and asking for details of these relatives of the underground is concerned, they have come up after perhaps the main hurdle was reached. And they are somewhat minor, I would say, in the overall context of the talks as such.
Okay.
Now, one reason where the talks could have got held up is that maybe in the final agreement, it would be logical to include the other Naga groups also, which the NSCN IM may not want. Secondly, as I said, what will be the shape of the government after the talks? And that is where their constitution or proposed constitution comes in, which is unfortunately highly influenced by the Chinese one-party communist system. That is where the democracy gets taken away quite a lot. And in fact, the people should be told very clearly what is there in the new Yazabo. The Yazabo proposed says nationalize all land, minerals, industries, etc. Now, in Nagaland, all land has always been with the tribals, with the tribes. Does it mean that the land now gets taken away from the tribes and under control from
so that itself is that's also a stumbling block. Let me try and see if I can go back to Mr. Keviloto. Mr. Keviloto, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, I can hear you.
Who do you blame for this crisis? Is it Mr. Ravi's fault or the NSCN IM's fault?
I think it is too early to say who is to be blamed also, because Ravi is just representing the government of India. The briefing from the government of India also have to be looked into. Now, to set this in record, we have to look at the framework agreement that was signed in 2015. Within that parameters, they are working on the details, the competencies, and while working out the competencies, they have hit some roadblocks, which was agreed earlier, but now there is a backtracking of the agreed competencies. Earlier, they were talking only to the NSCN.
Sir, are you worried that in case the talks are heading for a breakdown, are you worried that because touch wood, by and large, we've not seen too many major outbreaks of violence in Nagaland, are you worried that there could be violence?
Yes, definitely. If these talks fail, definitely there will be a violent conflict in the whole Naga areas, not the state of Nagaland alone. It will be affecting the 3 states of Arunachal, Assam, and Manipur. And that will be very, very unfortunate.
Okay.
But as of now, I don't believe the speculation that the talks are going to break down. I'm sure there are other tracks which is taking care of it.
Right.
So I'm still optimistic that this will go on. But the mistake created by the government.
Okay. You're optimistic. The mistake
created by the government.
Mr. Krome, Mr. Krome, if I can ask you, is that a worry?
As well as a governor.
That violence could flare up again? Is the NSCN committed to peace, or is there a fear that, violence could flare up?
If the attitude of Mr. Ravi, or for that matter, the attitude of the government of India is continuing like this, it is meaningless to have a peace process. And Nagas have been always dealt with violently for generations and generations. Ever since India became independent, we have faced nothing else but violence. For more than 25 years, Nagaland has been under complete lockdown, like what people in Jammu and Kashmir have been facing now. But those days, we have no internet, we have no communication system. There was no way of complaining to anybody.
Right.
So our sufferings were unknown to the world and even to India. But to be afraid of something that has not happened yet is, I think, not logical.
No,
but
of course. None of us want violence, and we hope that there will be no violence. So let's just hope for cool heads and sane heads all around.
No, but you can also say it's not only on the brink of collapse, but I think it is also a finest opportunity for the government of India to settle the problem if it has a political will.
Okay. Well, right now, as the NSCN himself says, the Prime Minister has mandated the IB to hold talks, and with the Prime Minister himself, if this is true, overseeing it, we can hope that there will this time be a genuine settlement, not the hyped earlier agreement. We're completely out of time. Thank you all so much for joining us. That's all the time we have on Reality Check. Good night.